Hello everybody, this is your evening girl, Katje welcoming you again to my YouTube channel. This evening I'm wearing another outfit that I purchased from White House Black Market. It's kind of a retro witchy outfit because I wanted to get into a Halloween spirit. So let me just model that for you. This is a reversible dress that also has a nice floral pattern on the other side, but I think for this evening the black works pretty well because I want to have kind of an eerie look. So let me model that for you. I hope everybody's doing well, and I hope everybody's getting ready for Halloween. Soon it will be here. So let me show you that. And then here it is from the other side. So this has kind of a retro look. It sort of has a kind of mid-60s retro look. I really like it. That's kind of a new way style to it as well. So that's the outfit. And what I want to do tonight is have a little bit of fun and tell a couple of kind of scary stories that these are actually true stories. These are a couple of stories that I want to share with you that have to do with things that actually happen. So let me get right down to it and sort of get us into the mood for Halloween. So both of my stories have kind of what you might say is a kind of broadly Native American theme. So let me just begin with the first story. So several years ago, I went to New Mexico and northern Arizona, and I was visiting various prehistoric Native American sites, both on the Navajo reservation and then west of there on the Hopi reservation. So one of the places that I went to is a wonderful site called Xoxo Canyon. And this is kind of like an ancient prehistoric, the ruins of an ancient prehistoric city that I think was actually settled by an early version of the Anasazi people who mysteriously disappeared. So I had spent the day at Xoxo Canyon, and I was staying at a little B&B about an hour from there, and it was a really nice little place, and there were several guests there, and so I only spent one night there. And after I had been to Xoxo Canyon, I then went to the B&B, and everybody sort of gathered in the dining room, and we had a nice dinner with wine and really good food. And after that, people began to tell stories because I'd mentioned that I'd gone to Xoxo Canyon, and one of the guests at the dinner was this Navajo gentleman who was probably in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. And so he told me an interesting story about another Anasazi site that he and his father had visited when he was a boy. Now, it helps to have a little bit of background here. The Navajo are afraid of Anasazi sites. Many of them are. They feel like they're haunted. They feel like they have strange presences there. And so they tend to shy away from them or stay away from them as a rule. But this one time, this Navajo gentleman said that when he was a boy, his father had actually decided to take him up into the mountains to one of these sites in a kind of secluded glen or valley high up in the mountains. So it was a sunny day, and they began climbing up this trail to get to the top of this mountain, and then I guess they could sort of dip down into this place where the Anasazi remains were. So there was no wind blowing that day, and according to this Navajo gentleman, and he said that they made their way up this path, but the farther up the path they went, the more they began to encounter this kind of strange resistance. It was almost like wind was blowing into them or things were bumping into them, but they were totally invisible. And so there wasn't any wind in the environment around them or in the weather, but there were these like sudden gusts, almost like something was colliding with them, trying to prevent them from coming up there. And he was convinced that it was some kind of spirit or some kind of presence, and so with his father. And so they finally got to the top of it, and they didn't dare to go any farther because at that point these things were sort of like colliding into them all the time, even though you could see that the trees weren't bending, the leaves weren't blowing, there wasn't any wind. There was just this series of very strange spiritual and ghostly presences that were buffeting against the young man, a child at that time, and his father, and they both got the very decided sense that they weren't wanted there, that something didn't want them to proceed into this high mountain canyon and look at these Anasazi ruins. And so they didn't. They sort of looked over into it, and then they turned around and went back. And as they went back down the mountain, nothing ran into them from behind. It was only when they were trying to go up that they experienced this kind of strange turbulence, this very strange, these buffeting, invisible presences. Now, when the man told this story, I got this very strong sense that he wasn't making it up. He seemed a little bit afraid. There was a kind of eerie sense in the room that he was telling something that had actually happened, and that he wasn't just making it up or misremembering it or something like that. So that was a very strange story, and I remember the entire time that I was in that part of the Southwest, I remember that story. Even when I went to the Hopi Reservation west of there, it sort of stuck with me, and it stayed with me all these years. Now that brings me to my second story, and this one I have first-hand knowledge of because I experienced it myself. So many years ago, when I was much younger, my parents used to have a farm, a sort of a cabin on a woodland tract out in the mountains of Tennessee, and so I would sometimes go out there by myself just to spend time and to spend the night and maybe to do some fishing or just to relax and have a little bit of fun. So I remember one time I went out there, and it probably was in the late summer. It was very quiet, and it was a really beautiful time of year, but I was all alone, and I wasn't afraid, but whenever I went out there, I would try to be cautious. I was always alert because the nearest town was 26 miles away, so you really had to be cautious. You had to be alert and aware of your surroundings. So I went out there that day, and I spent the day kind of hanging out, goofing off, taking it easy. And then I made some dinner that evening, and maybe I watched a little satellite TV, and then I went to bed. And I remember in the middle of the night waking up, and I felt like there was this strange presence all around the house, that it was kind of watching me. And there were like creeks around the house, and you could hear the water running, but I almost could hear, like in the water itself, it sounded like there were voices, and I had the very, very strong sense that there was some kind of presence all around the house, something that was conscious, something that was sentient, but not really a human being or an animal or anything like that, but it had a kind of intelligence about it. It's sort of like when you're in the room by yourself, and then somebody comes in and you feel like somebody's looking at you. Okay, well, this was kind of the feeling that I had that evening in the middle of the night, coupled with the sound of these voices in the water, or maybe it was only one voice. It was very, very hard for me to discern, but I know that I wasn't dreaming because I got up and got a glass of water, and I remember still experiencing this strange presence before I went back to bed. So I wasn't afraid, but I was mindful of it because, it was something real that I didn't really understand. Now, let's flash forward ahead about 5 years or so after that, and I remember that I was back out of the place at about the same time of year, maybe a little bit earlier in the summer, with a very good friend. And so we went out there to spend the night and sort of hang out, sort of kind of do what I had done those many years before. And there again, in the middle of the night, I remember waking up and hearing the same voices in the water and feeling this same presence around me. And it was exactly like the experiences that I had had about 5 years earlier. But I was kind of used to it by that time. I wasn't afraid, but I was wary of it. I was alert, but then I went back to sleep. Now the next morning, when we both woke up and sat down to breakfast, my friend began to tell me about this strange experience that he had had. And as he described it, this was something that he and I had never discussed at all. I had never mentioned my previous experiences about this strange presence all around the house, in the woods, and in the creek. I had never said anything to him about that at all. And yet he began to describe in almost exactly the same terms that I had used. He began to describe this very strange surrounding presence, with the voices in the water and the sense that the house was being watched. It was almost uncanny how exact his description was, at least how exactly it matched what I had said. Of course, I told him that I had experienced that many years, 5 years before or so. And for that reason, because he was talking about something that he had no prior knowledge of, I had never told him about, and yet he was describing it in almost exactly the same terms that had occurred to me the times I had experienced it. I felt that that was a confirmation. It was pretty good evidence that there was something out there. It was some kind of a presence. It was some kind of a, I don't know what it was. I don't even have an explanation, but I don't doubt for a minute that there was something real there. And many years after that, the place was actually flooded, and that's another story that I think I've told in one of my previous videos, but there were some mistakes made in the landscaping of the property that led to its becoming flooded, and I remember getting off of the property just before the floodwaters came rushing down and overflowing the creeks and basically washing the entire cabin away and the driveway away. And it was almost like the water was a living thing. It was somehow connected to this presence that my friend and I had felt that time before, and then I had felt even before that. So I think that what I want to say about this is that just as in the case of the Navajo gentleman's story about these strange spiritual presences that were buffeting him and his father as they tried to gain access to this Anasazi Canyon, or this very strange presence that was all around my parents' cabin in Tennessee and seemed to have a voice or some voices in the water. I think what I want to say about that is that I don't really know what those things are. I'm not going to try to explain them, but I'm also not going to try to explain them away, because I don't really doubt for a minute that there was something real there, that there was something going on. I think there are a lot of things, particularly in nature, and particularly in places that have a long history in the natural world. It doesn't surprise me that there are certain things there that maybe have a life of their own that we don't really understand, and I don't think that we should be afraid of them. I don't think that we should panic or anything like that, but I do think that we should be mindful of them, we should be aware of them, and I don't think it's a very good idea to fool around with them, because it's sort of like a child who doesn't know anything about chemistry, but then gets one of those chemistry sets that they used to sell, and then begins mixing up all kinds of chemicals, and doesn't really know what he's doing, and it might cause an explosion, or it might cause him to get burned or something like that. So I think I would say the same thing about some of these presences that we don't understand very clearly. Maybe certain Native American cultures understand them better than European culture, but I think that they're real, I think that they're there, and I think they're to be given a wide berth and respected and sort of left to their own devices. And just if you're alone in the in the natural world, and you feel something like that, don't panic, but try to be aware and try to be careful. So those are the stories I wanted to tell. They're a little creepy, but they are true. And that's, I think, a good way of sort of, for me, getting into the mood for Halloween. I may have some other stories that I'll tell as we get closer to Halloween. But until next time, this is your evening girl and your witchy babe, Katje. I wish everybody a restful and a peaceful and a relaxing good evening. Please be good to each other. Please take care of each other. Just be good to each other. I care for all of you. I thank you for spending some time with me. Thank you again for your patience. This is Katje. Everybody, I hope you have a great night. Thanks for joining me. Bye.